Hello, everybody. Today we are sharing an interview that we did with Dan Wotherspoon, who runs a podcast called Latter-day Faith. I have been a longtime listener and fan of Dan. He used to run a podcast called Mormon Matters that I started listening to about a decade ago. So it was a total dream to have him interview us and have the tables turned a little bit. He asked beautiful questions about who we are. I think we dig a little bit more into the anchors of our spiritual and religious choices and identities that we haven't quite shared before, as well as digging into this concept of worthiness that I think comes up a lot when life turns out differently than you expect and you're wondering why. So I hope you enjoy our conversation.
Hello, fellow travelers. This is Latter day Faith. I'm your host, Dan Wotherspoon. And, most of us who listen are somehow marginalized in some way. We're either, and I think most of it is usually we feel marginalized ourselves because we're not quite in step with what everybody else around us seems to be thinking, or our personality is just too big or something for a church that kind of, yeah, we like extroverts, but we don't like people
Mm,
who come at things from such a different angle than we do or something. And there's just all these reasons that we can feel like nobody really wants me here. But then there's external reasons why we can start to feel that way. And what we're going to talk about today is singleness within the Latter day Saint tradition, within Mormon wards, within just the everything from the theology of being single and how that can be a point that pushes people to a margin, or just the fact that um, it's like within Mormonism, all of the eternal goals and everything are dealing with married couples and same not and heterosexual couples
mhm,
beyond that. And I just through a good friend of both Diana and me, Abe Collier, who's actually been a guest on the show, I got in touch with Diana Brown, and she and her good friend Mallory Everton host the Soloists podcast. I think many of you will know of it from bigger platforms than mine. They recently did something with early on, you did something with Tim and Aubrey Chavez, who are the hosts of Faith Matters. And it was terrific to get to know you that were there. And you guys both spoke at Restored this last September. And so I think people know of you, but for those listeners of mine that don't, I'm just here to celebrate what you're doing, to pick your brains, to explore with you heartache as well as triumph. And then we all kind of agreed beforehand that we're going to weave in our own spiritual journeys,
mm,
and how it is it that, especially, I think most people know mine, and how is it that I can hold space within Mormonism for myself, but how you two are doing it and why you're doing it, what animates your your willingness and desire to do that. So, Diana and Mallory, thank you for coming on.
mm.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to get to know you, and I know our audience is just going to love what they're hearing. So, Diana, since you and I have been doing most of the pre-conversation, why don't you quickly introduce yourself to us, and then I'll have Mallory do that, and then I'll have you both just kind of talk to us about what you want to do with the podcast, what you've been doing, how it's changing over the course of your 6 months doing it, and
Mm,
all that stuff. So, Diana, tell us about your background.
Sure, yeah. Diana Brown, grew up in Ogden, Utah. Uh, Currently live and work in Washington, D.C. And I, yeah, how would I explain who I am? um, I I studied sociology of religion in school, in large part because I was watching people around me leave the church, my siblings, and I just wanted to better understand what was going on. I just came at it with this feeling of like, okay, everyone wants me to catastrophize here, but I'm also just deeply curious about it. And I've always had this sense that whenever people are like, ah, this can't happen, it will literally be the end of the world, there's always a part of me that I think, uh, my sense of Christ here that is like, "Really though? Is it is it really going to be the
Mhm.
end of the world?
Mhm.
That doesn't seem right to me. That doesn't seem consistent with what we say but we believe. Like, isn't this a place to go a little bit deeper in terms of understanding what's happening here? So that was kind of where I got my start, honestly, and just my adult life and the kinds of questions that shaped my studies. And then after grad school, I moved to Georgetown, or sorry, to Washington D.C., where I got a job at Georgetown University in their multi faith campus ministry and spent 6 lovely years in that department, working with students from a variety of faith traditions. And in that sort of pivotal space of life as they're deciding where they want to go and who they want to be, and that was really fun and illuminating. And after a while, I started thinking like I really want to do something new. And after being in the interfaith, multi-faith space so long, where I was getting to draw a lot from my own spiritual experiences to speak to other people and build programs and stuff like that, I really craved the intimacy of my own community and wanting to work
Mm.
there. So I'm very lucky. I reached out to Faith Matters and I've been doing work with them and helping them, and through that, Mallory and I started the Soloist podcast. We're also working on some depolarization initiatives, thinking about how that looks in the Latter-day Saint community. And yeah, that's basically me and what I'm doing.
Awesome. And it dawned on me when you said it, I didn't even say the name of your podcast beforehand. So you're the Soloists podcast. I may not have mentioned that early on, but thank you. That's great to know that background. Mallory, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, Diane and I have some like crossovers where we have some similarities, but also came from pretty different backgrounds. I went to BYU to study medicine, but ended up transitioning to film, and I was very active in the sketch comedy group on campus at BYU. It was actually I had extreme culture shock coming from Portland, Oregon, which is where I grew up when I got to BYU. And kind of the only thing that gave me any peace was meeting up with these other people and making fun of BYU culture together. Right.
Yeah.
Making fun of what I was seeing is performative faith, a lot of like sort of ritualistic infantilization. Like there were things that we once we started poking fun at them, they didn't feel so scary, they didn't feel so stressful. And that group of people ended up being my family for the next 10 years of my life. I That show that we were making just on campus for BYU students turned into a show on BYU TV called Studio C. So I was able to work on a sketch comedy show with my best friends from college for 6 years. And that was a wonderful experience and a complicated and confusing experience. That has also definitely nourished and challenged my own spiritual journey. Lots of questions about what is good media, what is bad media. Working for the church itself is very complicated because when you're not always treated well by your superiors, it can start to really feel like maybe the God isn't as involved as you thought. And all those questions have been so difficult and healthy for me.
Yeah.
But now I live in LA and I still work with those friends, which is really wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
A
one
couple
of
of
my
films
many.
in the last recent years, couple of
Yeah,
great films.
we've been able to make some films, and that's always been the dream for me, is movies and TV. So I'm out in LA to learn more about that and mostly learning lots about myself. But I'm a freelance artist and podcaster and writer and actress and editor and director sometimes. And I've never been good at specializing, and I am single.
Yeah,
So here
that's
I
kind of
am
I
talking
am
about it.
so glad that that just comes at the end of everything, you know what I mean? Because that's
It's
just
Easy
definitely
that's
not
just
my
transition point.
defining trait.
yeah, because most people, you know, that would be, "Oh, well, she's my single friend," right? Or something like that. Instead of like, "I have this amazing friend, and look at what she does, and blah, blah." Yeah, and
Aw.
then hopefully it doesn't even come up that you're single, but, of course, we're here to talk about,
Mhm.
I don't know, a life that, at least if you're LDS, didn't seem to, or it just didn't seem to unfold in the way that you probably thought it was growing up. So, um, uh, go ahead and share
Mhm.
quickly, what did you think you would be?
Mhm.
I'm assuming mid-30s for you
Yes.
Yeah.
guys? I didn't know for sure.
Yes.
Um, Where did you think you'd be doing? Would you be raising elementary school kids right now and uh, those kinds of
Uh-huh.
things? Or tell me what was the and then we'll get in a little bit into the disappointment,
Mm,
factor or whatever.
mm,
Yeah. This actually is a lot of what we covered in Restore, and Mallory and I sort of jokingly produced AI versions of what our ideal husbands look like when we were like 15 years old, um, by feeding them descriptions of the things that we wanted. Mine was uh, very moody, romantic man who had kind of an emo aesthetic and yet was very righteous, upstanding, deep, obsessed with me, obviously.
Obvious.
Um, anyway, yeah, there is this sense that that marriage and family was just an absolute inevitability and something that I wasn't coming for so much as it was coming for me.
Mm,
It felt inevitable. In fact, I think a lot of what I was feeling earlier in my life was actually kind of fear around marriage, and which is probably a lot of the reasons why maybe I'm not married. Is I think I've uh, basically it didn't really occur to me that you could, like, not do that. It just felt like you're at some point, life is going to lock you into this situation, and then you have to live it out, and you really, cross your fingers and pray it's somebody who will treat you kindly and all of those things. And so, anyway, I think, that's how it felt. It always just felt inevitable and, and a little bit divorced from the question of my own desires as well.
mm, mm. That's yeah. Let's
Sorry, I just
explore that
dropped
a
a
little.
lot of bombs
No,
there.
no,
Yeah.
no, it's beautiful. So well
that's
said.
worth exploring, man, for sure. Mallory, you seem like a super extrovert your whole life. Is that just the truth?
I'm actually, according to all the personality tests I've taken, I'm a pretty even split introvert extrovert. I think
Yeah,
the introvert does the writing and the extrovert does
yeah,
the acting.
yeah.
I've always I've always been very interpersonally connected though. I really really love people. It's a genuine, it feels like it's a gift for me that
Mhm,
hopefully is a gift for other people as well, but it
mhm,
really feels like it's mostly for me. I just take such joy in
mhm.
really getting to talk to almost anyone who's willing to talk to me about anything that they find interesting. um, and I definitely thought that given that I've always been social, that it would not be difficult for me to find a partner, uh, like it was some kind of, assignment that you could just get 100% on. And um, I think that I thought, yeah, I was thinking, oh, I'll probably not get married until I'm like 25 because
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so
Oh,
ambitious.
To be
oh, oh, yeah.
reasonable.
You're gonna have
Yes,
all
I'm gonna
that
be
life before you get
reasonable.
married.
But yeah, I'm gonna be one of those girls who graduates single for sure because I've got so much on my plate and I've got stuff to do. Passes, 30 comes. I and it suddenly becomes a question of, oh, maybe this will not happen. And what do I think life really even means, having grown up in the Mormon church my whole life, and specifically as a woman, where so much emphasis is on, like, we may not have the priesthood, but perhaps our priestesshood is in our motherhood. Uh, what does that make me? What am I? What is life for? What are children for? Who am I? Why am I here? Horrifying questions. Horrifying questions I wouldn't wish on anyone. The fact that women also have to be concerned about fertility, but about whether or not that there's like a chapter of your life that's epically painful where the window is slowly, slowly closing and you are just having this regular look up to God, like, am I doing something really wrong? What's going on here? And yeah, I think I'm getting to a point where I'm grateful for the space that we're creating on the soloist, in part because I think it's very tempting to ask the question, why? Why am I single? What have I done? Maybe this is why. In fact, Diana and I have talked about this before, but single people aren't really afforded the same type of privacy that married people are. Our our sort of lack is on display. And so
Oh, wow.
there's there's this element that people can weigh in, give
Yeah.
Mhm.
advice. You can are
Oh,
extra,
no.
are more willing to bestow pity or you
Yeah.
go
Yes.
girls
Or
than
yeah.
It took me till I was 29 to marry, right? You're still home.
yes, You're
I caught
exactly
that
right.
on one of your shows. Yeah.
Right. But then what about when you turn 30? Like for me, the person I held in high esteem who was single for a long time was my friend Katie. She was my brother-in-law's sister, and she got married when she was 31. And you better believe me turning 32 was difficult.
Oh
You
man.
know? But the questions are starting to become less why and more how. How can I do
Mm,
this? How can I make this place beautiful? And
Yep.
what? What do I do next? What would you like me to do next? What should I stop doing? What should I start doing? The question
Mm-hmm.
of why, is there ever an answer to that? Like, I mean, there are people in LA right now whose homes have burned down and their next door neighbors didn't. Do we have an answer why? Should
yeah.
we even ask? You know?
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and then so many people want to quickly go, God blessed me, and I'm just like,
Right.
that's not my God. There's no God that um,
Yeah.
plays that game. It's like,
I,
Yeah.
hey, plate tectonics, dry conditions, Santa Ana winds, all this kind
right.
of. That's all it
Yeah.
Well,
is.
I I had a beautiful experience on Sunday because my YSA bishop actually was one of the people who lost his homes, and he bore this incredibly powerful testimony. And then afterward, our state president made a comment, and he said, "This is an example of a man whose faith is relationship based, not outcome based."
Mm,
And I do think there's something to say for how much we pay attention to outcomes and we talk about them like they
Mm-hmm.
are proof of God. My mom and I had a great discussion about this because I had a really like beautiful productive year but did not come out with some of the outcomes I hoped for by the end. And so I found
Mm-hmm.
myself at the end of 2024 being like, what am is this working? Like what am I
Yeah.
doing exactly? And we had a great conversation about how um people uh specifically with parenthood is what my mom brought up. She said people often think my kids turned out great because I was a good parent.
Mm.
But I can see I can see you shaking your head because yeah, it's not true. That's not true. Like how can you as a good parent account for the entire environment of your child, all of their friends, all of their teachers, their Sunday school teachers, you, all of that. Like
and
it's
just who
not
they came to
actually.
this world like.
Yes.
I
Who.
have I have a son that there was, I by the time I could really see where his spirituality or whatever was going, he was an uncorrelatable soul. There was
Yes.
Mm.
no way that he wasn't
Uncorrelatable.
gonna make his own. He had to learn
Yes.
from his own mistakes. Wide Open Spaces, Dixie Chicks, an amazing song, because it
Beautiful.
talks about that's what you have to do. And so we had to let go of, you know, the typical Mormon idea.
Mhm.
And then the most beautiful thing happened about a year and a half ago because my wife was especially worried. She kind of deals with anxiety. She'd admit that and
Mm.
talks about it. Um, and so she felt like so many things she did kind of screwed him up.
Mm.
Just like whatever. I was so outrageous when this happened or whatever. And I'm so sorry, bud. And finally, after, this being their relationship for his whole adult life, he
Mm.
goes, Mom, he goes, whenever you bring that up, it makes me think that you don't think I'm living who I am right now in the best way that I can. And it was
Mm.
like a wake up call for her, for me, but just
Yeah.
to see but I was so glad he was able to say that to her because if you are woulda, coulda, shoulda on your children, um, man, you're gonna, you're never gonna,
Right.
your lens for them is going to be distorted by your hopes or what you had imagined.
There's
And they
such a
feel that.
dynamic. Oh, absolutely. I think there's such a dynamic example of an outcome. This we're literally talking about a human being, but I think often people might count them as outcomes for the work that they've done being good or bad. But I think that what I am toying with is that it's possible we have much less to do with our quote unquote outcomes than we think. And are we feeling responsible for the rain and feeling responsible for the sun when we should just say thank you, no matter what it is?
Yeah.
Mm, gorgeous. Yeah. I may have interrupted a really good flow of yours, so I apologize if that was the case. Uh,
No, I thought
I,
that was
I,
perfect.
I think we went into this a little prematurely because I wanted to quickly, and you both have begun the conversation of it, but you started Apollo, you started the soloists because you wanted all the different aspects of being single in a married church, family church, whatever you'd want to say it, and just being single as a human being in a world where, again, most people assume you'll be partnered up in some kind of more major way than long time dating or something. I imagine they just feel like that's where they're going to be at. What, and I've listened to parts of every one of your shows, and you have such a variety of topics on there. I'll tell you, my favorite one was celibacy.
Mhm.
Really?
That was fascinating to hear the perspective of this Catholic priest and
Mhm.
this other woman who value it for a different reason. And you guys presented a
Mhm.
Mormon vision of heaven, and I could tell those guys' heads were spinning,
Mhm.
and all that. So I mean, you've just done some really great topics. What were your goals? And as you've gone on and you've received feedback, and you guys, I mean, I just admire you're on all the platforms now. You've got like, what I'm barely on. We had one of our board members barely put us on Instagram the other day. So
Mm.
you know, but for your feedback and things, how's it changed? So what did you want? What are you doing? And what's emerged
Yeah.
along the way? Do you want to start us, Diana?
Sure, I can start, and then Mallory fill in the whatever I
Okay.
miss. I think when Mallory and I first got set up by Bill Turnbull to talk about this, he was like, "You two, you're good. Just get together, plan something. We'll support it." And which was so generous. And I think I sense that though Mallory and I both came to that conversation with yes, grief, fear, some of the things that are that often accompany this single experience. I think there's also this point where we both realized what actually really hurts is that people look at this like it's an empty wasteland, and sometimes it feels like nobody believes in you anymore. People, but this is such a rich, productive space that people don't even notice. And I just felt like we were both sort of burning to talk about like the growth opportunities and the ways that that this experience yeah, just opens up the human spirit to you in a new way. And I think that this has been a very intuitive project. We haven't come in to the project itself or to each episode with like a firm agenda other than to just sort of affirm the wholeness and dignity of this experience. And this is like a very meaningful place of growth. And then we're also doing very particular and more pointed points of exploration, as you pointed out, like wanting to think theologically with this question of singleness. Um, I think the Mormon conception of uh, of eternity as us as connected family oriented beings, right? That we are not islands unto ourselves. We are richly connected. I think it's so beautiful. I love the chain of belonging and
Mhm.
us connecting all humans throughout history. It's so evocative and beautiful to me. We also have lost touch with some things that I don't even think Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible is capable of undoing, which is the sense of like, and yet the single life offers a really rich way to consecrate yourself to God. This is Paul, this is Jesus, frankly, right? Like
Mhm.
that was
Mhm.
not part of their mission on earth. I know there's some
Jesus
speculation
wasn't
about,
married? Come on, man.
but I guess there's Dan Brown's theory. There,
I'm messing with you. It's just
I mean,
it
there's
seemed like that was in the
speculation for
air
both of
definitely
those,
before.
but Jesus told us that excuse me, my cold. I mean, just today I was listening to, uh, you know, right after the Sermon on the Mount, the person comes to him and is like, I want to follow you. And he's like, just so you know, following me, you have no place to lay your head.
Mm.
I'm glad it's quoting scripture directly. I need to do more scripture, so more ponderizing. But I think you know the verse I'm referring to, that homeless sense, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And Paul too, Paul saying it's better to marry than to burn, but otherwise it's better to be single for me and be able to consecrate yourself to the kingdom of God. And so
yeah.
you know, I quite like the Mormon edit of those that's saying, and yet we are always connected and we should figure out like how to really lean into our relationships.
Mhm.
But if we're, I mean, but I also think that we've made an idol of family and we've leaned so hard in that direction that to me, just it feels on a spiritual level like we're doing actual harm to people when when we lead them, when we create a culture and reinforce a culture that makes you feel like you are disconnected, you have no meaningful ways to serve or to give because you haven't landed in this highly particular and frankly difficult to obtain type of relationship. So theologically, I'm not a theologian. I like Mallory and I both like to read. I think we like to engage these ideas, but we're just wanting to plant seeds and just spark conversations around some of these things, and then certainly dig into aspects of church culture that can be changed or addressed to help singles have a better experience in the church and not feel marginalized. And then the last thing I'll say, and then Mallory, I'm sure you'll have plenty of things to add, but I think that we definitely see this as something that has much broader import than just to Latter-day Saints. In fact, we've talked sometimes about how Latter-day Saints might have something really to offer the world here because we start mourning the fact that we're single when we're like 22. You know what I mean? It's just like such a family-oriented culture that you're so primed to freak out about this. And, I now have very secular peers in DC who are totally freaking out about these questions. I'm like, I've kind of been there. And they're reckoning with this for the first time in their mid 30s, like, whoa, what if I actually never partner and marry and have children? What does that mean for my future? And I do think that there's a broader context for this where it's not just these fluke cases. People are marrying less and are staying married less. And I think that it's easy for this conversation to get trapped in the culture wars and people wanting to be like, yeah, and it's because people are selfish and just need to hunker
Mm.
down. And you know, there might be some sociological theories, policy things we should address or whatever. We're trying to do a pastoral project here on this
Oh, I love it.
podcast, though,
Yeah.
where we're really trying to say, and yet here you are today, and how can we show up to our own lives and to ourselves in ways that allow us to really live in the world as divine beings. And so I think we're trying to sidestep some of the political cultural drama that can arise around this question too.
Mm,
Yeah.
that is wonderful, man. I love it.
That was
And
a lot.
that's big. And one thing I've noticed, and when you said the word pastoral, I think you can only be pastoral when you're open, and
Yeah.
you two share, you know, hard things and difficult things and disappointments along with the triumphs. And I think that's the essence of pastoring, when you can tire meets the road stuff and you guys are
Mm,
talking about it. So
mhm.
I love that. I'm glad that you put that label on it. Mallory,
Oh, I mean, I have
what
so
did you
little
guys
to
have
add
to
to that. I think that was such a beautiful sum up, Diana. I know that one of the things that's been brought to our attention from the very beginning is that the single population in the church is so much larger than people think. It's over 50% of
Mhm.
the church. And also that singleness is a circumstance that it may pass through anyone's life at any point, at any moment. It's something that it feels like something that's a very nice analogy or symbol to do lots of work from. So, like, I just had somebody reach out who's partnered, but was able to find herself in our podcast quite a bit, and I found that very heartening. Um, and I think it's in part because the topic of singleness is just about your life not being what you pictured, your life not being exactly what you wanted. And so I think because we know that population is so large, and we know that even the partnered population may ebb and flow. In fact, they will. They definitely will. Nothing in life is permanent. Um, if you get to live long enough, you or your partner will be single eventually. If you're the luckiest of lucky.
Yeah.
So, uh, a a life where solitude is embraced in some way is important for us to talk about and discuss,
Mhm.
for us to feel whole without some kind of somebody picked me badge, or I have this partner with me at this party badge. So I think catering to what is a larger population than people often even discuss. And then also really trying to open up that space of hopefulness that life is big and magical, that some of these paths are more windy and twisted than what we were sort of taught to expect.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
the
like,
formula, yeah.
yeah, but actually, a windy, twisted path is so much more surprising and mysterious, and there's so much to look forward to. So I think being able to cultivate a place where you know you're not alone and where you know the world is big and anything could happen. Anything could happen, and this could be surprisingly gorgeous. Trying to cultivate that kind of attitude of abundance really in this
Mhm,
space that can feel
mhm,
so fraught with shame, doubt, remorse. It's very easy to look back on your like 20s as a woman in her mid 30s and say, what did I do wrong? I should have married all 12 of those guys that I considered or whatever. um but that I don't believe that that's what we're here for. The past is the past, and we've got all this magical uh, agency in this moment. So I think we're just wanting to really cultivate a space where people can really access that.
mhm,
Mhm.
mhm. Wow, I love it. Tell me, this large section of single folks in the church. It seems like the church is great when you're a widow or a widower. It seems
Mm,
like at least the support's there because
sure.
you accomplished the task. you know, you remain partnered for a length of time, and cancer came along or whatever it was. Your partner died, and you had a beautiful episode with Sam Brown recently on that touched on those kinds of things. um, Divorce, these are people who've accomplished the task, but somehow or other they screwed it up. Or,
Mm,
I mean, I think there's a recognition that, you know, somebody wasn't who they presented themselves at. You get into a relationship, or, especially now in Mormonism, when it's so easy to find um, things to complain about in the church, or to not oh, I threw my whole life into this thing and it was so important to me and all my
mm,
goals and everything were here, and they lied to me about the history, or
mm,
they promised me these things and it didn't happen. So you get again, I think the divorced folks get some space that perhaps single folks don't, because, and you guys have brought it up at least a couple times on the show, there's a nagging sense of, am I not worthy to have
yeah.
partnered up? Do you guys want to talk about that pain, and the way you have transmuted that into something uh, more
Mm.
substantial? Do you
Yeah,
mind? I guess we're going. I
that's
guess we're going Diana
that's
and Mallory on
so
these. So
I
we
I
could
want to
sure
we
hear
we
could
from
we could
can.
Diana.
trade it around
You go,
later.
Diana. This has been on my mind a lot recently. I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah. I really resonate with what Mallory said earlier about how useless and tiring the why questions get. Um,
Hmm.
and I think not just on the question of singleness, but that question of why this or that happened, the sense of unworthiness is usually the top thing that's the default thing that comes to my
Hmm.
mind, is that I have
Hmm.
done something wrong. Um, yeah, it's just kind of in my disposition. That's where I'm inclined to go. And I think what's just hard is when you're single, when you're younger, and it can be kind of cute and at BYU to be like, I'm not gonna get married young, not me. There's there's almost a cultural pat on the back, like, yeah, you're ambitious, good for you, whatever. But then you get to an age at some point where people start actually being like, are you sure you know what you're doing here? This looks pretty, like, I don't know. And
Hmm.
I've gotten to places where I realize that if I am bringing fears about my own unworthiness here, it's amplifying other people's fears, sadly, about my own unworthiness.
Hmm.
And it shouldn't be there. It's not fair for all the reasons that we've talked about. There's all sorts of ways people probably feel deeply unworthy in their marriages, but if you're married, it looks like you're doing things right. So people aren't out there speculating what's wrong with you.
Oh, wow, yeah,
Hmm.
you're right.
So I guess in some ways, actually, I think being single has been such a gift to me. as a person who is so prone to not just unworthiness, but frankly, a kind of self-loathing. If I'm being honest, like I just am very, very hard on myself. Being single has been a gift because it has forced me to be my own best friend and supporter. And I also am very lucky to have a wonderful, wonderful twin sister who is my best friend and more than my best friend. She's like an angel in my life. And just an example of, yeah, I'm single, but I am so richly connected, and she has just things that she's said and ways she's supported me over the years have been so helpful. But that's been something that she's told me just years, just constant repeating through this or that situation with work or relationships or whatever is just, Diana, you need to find that in yourself, that sense that you are good. And if you don't do that, you're never going to find it. Like you just can't wait for life to give that to you. And I think it literally took me years to even comprehend what she was saying. Obviously, you can see the words as they're popping up on your text message, but to really understand what that means to affirm the goodness of your own life. Maybe I think I hope certainly that that's easier for other people, but I know that that's been very difficult for me. And I do feel grateful for the kind of privacy that and solitude that singleness has offered me in abundance, because I think it has just asked me to return to that question over and over again of, Diana, do you affirm your own goodness as a person? Do you like, it's a very sacred question, and not one that has like a firm answer, because it's something that's more like a prayer to show up with that every day. So it's not like I'm like, and yes, I do, like it's obviously
You're not
I
that's
found that, yes. Um,
you're not
but it's
staring in the mirror every day with affirmations, right? Okay.
well, or I sort of am in the sense that, like, I guess what I'm saying is that, like, I am grateful for singleness, for drawing
Right.
attention to that. And I'm grateful even for the kind of abandonment that I feel sometimes by the culture, where I now feel like other people are like raising an eyebrow, like maybe she is unworthy, maybe she is doing something wrong, speculating about me, because I think it has again forced me to realize that actually, yeah, it is always just it really does begin here. And I could hide from that question and from that responsibility in myself for so long if I don't, yeah, if I don't address it. So
Right, and so many people don't even get to that question who've been married, they've done the 40 years of marriage life, and they're still not
Mhm.
there. So,
Yeah.
Mm.
yeah, yeah, really, really powerful. Thank you. Mallory?
Yeah, I think with what you're saying, I mean, this is similar to what we were talking about earlier with outcomes maybe not having to do as much as we think with the work we're doing, and definitely not with our inherent worth. But um I can't remember who said it to me, but a few years ago I had a friend tell me single people worrying that they've done something wrong is very similar to married people thinking they've done something right. Um,
Mm.
and
Oh,
so
wow,
so
yeah,
the assumption that you've done something right might actually, prevent you from doing some of the work that you might be forced to do if you feel like you're doing something wrong. And I'll say, like, in this space of worthiness is such a big topic for me when it comes to the way we talk about it in the church. I just,
I
like,
hate it.
I do too. I wish it was a word we didn't use because it actually feels like such an obvious oxymoronical thing to, like, how could we talk about worthiness when it's inherently always there no matter what you do,
We
no
are
matter
of
if you,
worth.
like,
Yeah,
murder a nation, your soul is still of worth. Like, there's not a sin that could make God not love you. And I get that that's not the way we define worthiness, but it's such a fraught word. um, but my relationship with this particular thing has forced me to really think about my relationship with God, because definitely spent my 20s, and this wasn't just in, like, the romantic channel of my life, but also in the career channel of my life. I need to be perfect. I need to make sure that I'm doing all of the I remember hearing this this Bednar quote when I was maybe 20, and it was very grounding to me, and it affected me a lot. He was basically saying, like, if you're a good girl or you're a good boy, then you can just trust that you're being led by the Spirit. And so to me, I was like, okay. And what is my 100% on every test brain doing with that? I need to obey every rule, even if I don't understand it. I need to do what I'm told, and all of the different scrupulous ways to try and break down. Is this not going well because I am no longer a good girl? Because I didn't do that this week, or I did that this week. And I really feel like what ended up happening for me in a lot of ways was I did absolutely everything I could to just white knuckle that iron rod.
Mhm,
Just
mhm.
absolutely grip it so hard because I was so terrified if I stepped a single toe out of line, my loving God would punish me by not sending me someone to marry. I'm so
Oh,
embarrassed to say that out loud, but it's so true. My life
no.
feels like a punishment when I look at it that way, because I just felt on some deep level, it was very, like, rooted in prosperity gospel, but it's so understandable. I really thought I was preventing my romantic apocalypse somehow. And
Mhm.
what ended up happening? He didn't show up anyway, no matter how hard I gripped that iron rod. And to me, similar to what Diana was saying, what a gift to reveal what feels like, I don't know if I'll ever get to the true character of God, but I feel like I'm getting closer as I
Right.
understand that a life is never a punishment. Is never a punishment. And I don't think I believe in winners and losers anymore even. I don't know that those types of distinctions are very helpful to us at all. And what I've really been considering is that I think organized religion, especially a high demand religion, as people often classify Mormonism, it sets you up to have a very anxious relationship with God in terms of like attachment style. An
Right.
anxious relationship being, I need to be perfect for you to love me. I have to earn it. Uh, and I'm hoping I'm moving into something more secure where we could say, I don't think I've ever been out here earning it from you. And I trust that you will help me navigate these twists and turns, regardless of whether or not my behavior is always straightforward. Because if I believe in a God, like a secure relationship, I've heard before described as when you're in the presence of someone who's deeply fond of you.
I like it.
The idea of sitting across from God who is deeply fond of you, how are they going to respond if you come home with an F on your paper or
Mm,
having made a mistake or you're 2 hours late for curfew?
yeah.
And I don't think we're gonna we're gonna behave better being terrified that we're going to be punished. And so I'm grateful to be in the chapter of my life now where I'm like, I'm going to consider everything that you're giving me a gift, or it's my challenge to figure out how it is, because I know you're
Mhm.
deeply fond of me, God. And
Mhm.
I know that if it made sense for me to have a partner on this path, he'd be here, but he's not. So what's beautiful about this? And it's
Yeah.
making me more creative. It's definitely making me more compassionate. The person before who believed that single
Yeah,
people
right.
were
Yeah.
diminished somehow, like I really believed that. I must have, because that's what I believed about myself. So it was actually
Mhm.
revealing the judgments that I was putting on others my whole
Mm.
life. And I have had to relinquish those as I have started to feel those judgments coming toward me. Um, people commenting on the fact that, I'm too picky or I'm getting older or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's because my singleness is seen as some mark against me. And I have to believe that God doesn't want us to feel so limited, and
Mhm.
that God's limits are not the world's limits. So
Mm,
Yeah.
beautiful. Go ahead, Diana. Oh, thought you were
Uh,
following up. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's such a lack of courage around this question, and it feels so ironic. How can we believe in a God that came and suffered every pain that there was to suffer, that wanted to go into the deepest, darkest crevices of human experience, and then we're like, "Oh my gosh, she didn't get married by 26," or like, you know, Brett and her broke up? Like, really? We're not big enough to handle these kinds of things? Like, especially when you get into, like, what dating looks like and how silly some of it is, and just, like, I don't know, all the games you have to play and these things. I don't know. It's just like, let's just be like 10% more courageous and in like sticking to our actual convictions about what life is about how far God's love goes. Like this, come on, we've got this, you know. Um, and anyway, it feels sad that we've got a culture that sometimes reinforces that this idea that you need to catastrophize having
Mm.
honestly a really great life that's so rich and abundant and gives so many ways to give. We have the most beautiful families, we love our siblings, we've got great friends, like, it's okay that we're not married, it's okay, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got
Oh man.
this.
Yeah. Oh man. Those are both so powerful. I hadn't heard that, "deeply fond of you," Mallory.
Mm,
I really like that. Sometimes, you know how you kinda do different presentations and you kinda get on certain starts and whatever, and I used to, like, try to, just make space for 4 to 5 minutes for folks to think of those times in their lives where they felt completely was safe with somebody. And
Mm.
whether it's your grandmother or your mom or your twin sister, um, to where you just know that there's nothing you could do that would break the way they see you, they know you, whatever is out presenting itself now isn't you. I mean, isn't it doesn't make that central core of you too. You're still it's still transparent to them, let's put it that way. And I was trying to get to the point where if we can find somebody like that in our life, how could we imagine that God,
Mhm.
yeah,
who has even more, like you're saying, Diana, it's drawn on so much more intimacy with all the shit of life, how he couldn't do that. But I really like deeply fond of you because it makes it less cosmic in the
Mhm.
immediate now, you know what I mean? So anyway,
mm,
I appreciated that as just a really great, um, approach to so many things when it comes to, do we love God or do we fear God? Kind of
yeah,
questions. Yeah. Hey,
mhm,
I there was a couple of things there that I think will give us good springboards into when we talk about our spiritual lives and kind of how they have moved their way through this, and what is it you've done that makes you still say it's worth being
Mm.
in Mormonism in the engaged way that we are and all that stuff. But I wanted to give you guys a chance to talk about other issues beyond this worthiness one that I kind of got us started with here, that you think are dominant within LDS singles lives, or dominant among the way that people react to you guys. So anything else that your show is really trying to give voice to? Any thoughts?
I would just say, Mallory, you were about to start, you go.
Oh, no, I wasn't. I was just taking a breath and thinking, "You're good."
It looked like a powerful breath, something gonna come from
It
it,
is
It's a
fun
big
when
thought.
everybody's just hearing our voices, but we're seeing each other's faces
Mhm,
and smiles and cheering each
yeah.
other on kind of things.
This maybe is a good transition comment to what you want to talk about next with our spiritual journeys. But um, I think what we're wanting to do is articulate something like what the future can look like as a single person, because that to me is one of the sticking points with belonging in the church is that I do want a world to practice with, and I want a world that sees me as a legitimate human being um, and where I know how to plug in and where there's a kind of natural ease with that. And so I think we're wanting to articulate and promote other forms of love and care and relationships. Tomorrow we're having a conversation with Amy Harris, who has written so beautifully about the sibling relationships and these overlooked underappreciated relationships that really hold us throughout the entire life course. And so I think that's something we want to emphasize too, is a sense of relational abundance, and and how that speaks to just what we often experience as deprivation.
Hmm.
So I don't know. There's a lot we could say, but that's one thing I'd add.
Cool. Something else that's a big issue or a big theme that runs through anything that you can think of, Mallory?
I think, honestly, I might not add anything else to what we've discussed just
Mhm.
because everything feels like, to be honest, everything feels like a can of worms. Everything always feels like a can of worms, which actually is very fun, and I'm generally always down to go there. But just to, um, I feel like there are so many concerns about. I think the general blanket concern is what Diana was talking about, which is like, what does your life look like? What does your future look like? How terrifying is it? What is a full life? What does it mean to be a person who, because we get the sense that there are people in our community who are kind of all over the sexual spectrum, like when it comes to having experience, and then obviously also sexual orientation. And we have a kind of relationship with sexuality as Mormons that is like really fraught and and tricky. We almost like celebrate sex maybe more than many religions do, but also
Oh,
not anything but marriage. So if you're not married,
yeah.
and it's a very, very tricky nexus that I think, as far as like the way things can look in the future, not just in our personal lives, but also as a church, could look like more nuance, more diversity, might scare people. That's okay. That's
Yeah.
like I think if we're talking about really embracing, for example, the new for strength of youth, then hopefully we're talking about really being able to embrace very differently shaped lives. We're not talking about homogeny. We're not talking about one way to live the gospel. We're talking about love for all the different approaches, all the different ins and outs and halfway in betweens that come along with being a person who occasionally or always uses the church for support. But I'm very interested in this sort of, that's part of the reason I'm like, it can be a can of worms, but I also love that we have a can of worms because I think
Yeah.
it will force us into better relationship with each other. What are we doing being so terrified by difference? We've talked about that with the singleness thing. I actually think that sometimes the reason that people are like very quick to judge a single person is because they need you to be they need there to be something wrong with you, or else it just doesn't make sense. Like they
Mm.
need that emotional distance to be like, well, to be honest, Mal's pretty picky, or she's kind of she's kind of a raging feminist, right? No wonder men don't like her, or whatever. It's like, but you say something like that, and then you feel protected because you're not like that, so it would never happen to you if it's this horrible thing. Um, and so I think really just trying to figure out how we can create less emotional distance, and
Mm.
more curiosity around each other's experiences. And I just don't think that's ever gonna steer us wrong. So I'm hoping that these
Yeah.
kinds of spaces can help us get there together.
Yeah. Opening
Hmm.
lots of cans of worms. I love that, Mallory.
Great.
A theme that is emerging with you two throughout this is singleness has forced you to do inner work that you may not have, you know, if life it had at least on the surface been so partnered, or you were always involved with some project because you could now be the Relief Society president, or and I will say we have a single woman who's the Relief Society president in two of my wards. So, but I mean, but there's so many things you get involved with. I think it's hard to do inner work, and your lives have forced that, and you've come to appreciate that rather than sort of the pass through some of that we could kind of get involved with. And the bet of this podcast is, and the reason we call it Latter Day Faith, is because I think it's with introspection and inner work and um, increasing our spiritual connection to God, spirit, the universe, whatever you want to call it. Whatever it is that the deep part of our souls, can be fed by. that doesn't rely on external things to. So the bet is, and I guess I'm making this bet because that's what happened in my own life, is that when I have this deeply grounded faith in my own worthiness, because I've touched that I am part of this universe,
Mm,
that is, you know, there's it's so overwhelming. It can be so overwhelmingly beautiful that I know that I'm okay, and thoughts of whether I'm going to be saved in the next life, or all that kind of stuff, they just disappear. But anyway, back to the bet. The bet is that the more spiritual work we do, the better we can handle
mm,
the stuff that happens around us. And so, we're not talking about the last days, but here, life in the Latter Day Saint tradition. So, Latter Day faith. If we have a certain level of, a certain depth of faith, and a certain um, turn, a certain grounding of our faith, we can handle the crap in the foreground better. And so, you guys are handling the singleness foreground, the 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 struggles, how do I live courageously when it didn't go as I planned? You're doing all that stuff, and I want to kind of know about where 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 did the courage to do that? Where did the desire to continue to do that wrestle when it's so easy to check out?
mm.
um, within Mormonism or something. So I'm assuming that there's something deep in your Mormon backgrounds that you love. And again, so many of your friends and relationships are within that. But at a certain point, it takes a lot of courage to show up on Sunday, or to, put yourself in a space where you don't agree with almost anything else, anything anyone else is saying,
Mm.
uh, because you've just seen it from such a more complex, you're living it on a more complex level than this, that all the shorthands of testimony, and this is our conviction kind of stuff, um, there's more to it. So that was way too long. I'll probably cut some of that. But who wants to start with, why is this worth it, and how did you get to that point, and how much of it was, um, how much is this fed by your deep faith?
Mm.
I don't know, is that,
What what
yeah,
a question. First of all,
yeah.
I just want to say thank you for giving us so much credit about all the inner work we're doing. I it's such a treat. To be honest, I feel like inner work is so tricky because we do not give awards for that stuff. It's like I'll get to the end of a year where I feel like I've done all this incredible renovation inside
Mhm.
myself. But if I don't have a cool job and a hot boyfriend, nobody cares.
Yeah,
So
right,
thank you.
right.
Well, I would
I
just
do
add to that as well, really quick, on this idea of inner work. I also feel like I end up doing the work that I have to do to keep going. So, do
yeah.
I really deserve a pat on,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
congratulations for, yeah. And so,
yeah.
I don't think we take up questions that we don't have to all the
Oh,
time.
of
So,
course, yeah.
anyway, yeah,
I
be
was
great.
gonna say I actually really feel like the singleness forcing us to do the specific type of inner work. I think I think everybody's doing this work. What I love about the singleness question in particular is just as like a storyteller even, I'm very aware that almost every movie or book or play becomes richer when we add a romantic plot line. It's because it's so relatable for
Mm,
people. And I
nice.
think this is as far as like translating what we're trying to talk about to people, I think they get it right away because the singleness thing is so stigmatized because it's so present in almost everything we discuss and because almost every life seemed to be shaped around some kind of narrative that has to do with finding an eventual deep romantic connection. So while I do think everybody is doing this work, this is one of my favorite things. Even when I'm talking about work, sometimes I use analogies about romance, like, oh, I've got this partnership and it's like we need to go to couples therapy for this reason or whatever. And it's helpful because I think it's such a good way to translate what we're talking about to other people. But it really is the same kind of thing. It's like, how can we discuss not getting what we want? How can we discuss what it's like to be misunderstood by the people around you, or to need to be categorized in one way or another, or to be defined by what you lack instead of what you are?
Mhm.
Um, just to and to circle back to your larger question about essentially why we keep trying, why I've kept trying. I have some embarrassing reasons, to be honest, but I'll get into them. One of my reasons, I feel like I have several, is that because I was on a show on BYU TV. If you Google me, I'll be Mormon forever. It doesn't
No
matter if
kidding.
I leave.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't matter if I leave. Like, I'll never be able to get on top of that SEO, like, whatever optimization's happening on those websites. It's just gonna be like, "Mallory Everton, Mormon artist." It's like the interview I did in 2012 or whatever. And I'll admit there have been chapters of my life where I have found Mormonism so
Oh,
embarrassing. And
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
mean that as an insult to
yeah.
any particular person or but for me, I have been deeply embarrassed by the direct association, and I can't do anything about it. It happened.
Mm.
It's here. And
Yeah.
in some ways, that has kept me here, that I've had to
Mm.
say, I can't abandon these people. I'm a Mormon forever." So, and do I think that everybody I sit next to in pews believes the exact same thing as me? No, and I don't require that. But it has forced me to recognize, just because a community or like a religious framing might be flawed, that doesn't mean that these people are any less people, and I speak this language and I know how to talk with and serve these people. So why would I leave and stop? And by leave, I don't even mean leave the church. I mean leave the conversation. Like, why not continue to engage? And that's not, again, like, it's not, that's not prescriptive for anybody else's experience, but for me, as a single person who's like, I don't even know what else to do with my time. Sometimes I feel like I am useless to everyone. At least these people know what I mean when I say, I really felt the spirit when that happened. I
Mhm.
like that shared language. I'm grateful I have that with somebody. I
Yeah,
don't care where you're at on the spectrum, and I hope you don't care where I am either. But we grew up singing the same primary songs, and I continue to like to be able to talk about the universe in the same terms and with the same language with somebody.
Mm.
that's neat.
I love that, Mallory. So well said. I relate to it deeply, though I have far less the SEO presence. But um but it is very true to me for me in other ways that like I can't undo the Mormon in me. I just can't. I think if I tried, it would be a constant uphill battle and probably like a performative one of
Mm,
that I don't think is worth fighting. And that's not to, everybody comes to different conclusions on that. But for me, I've much rather just wanted to be with reality and be with myself. I can only live the life I've got. And,
Right.
here I am. In addition to that, I I will say there's this sense of being embarrassed by Mormonism that I deeply uh, relate to. I also sometimes feel afflicted by my faith.
mhm.
Because I frankly I do feel like I've gotten to a point where the social incentives have really worn off to just stay active in the church. My parents I've had several siblings leave the church, so my parents have been through that. It would hurt them, but they'd accept me, they'd
Right.
still love me. Um, my friends would. In fact, most of my close friends are no longer practicing. In
Right.
fact, they might even love it if I had left, right? Like, and I could feel like deep communion with them, and I really mourn that so much, right? That I can't um uh yeah, be in communion with some of my friends who have left. um Dating would be so much easier. I have been in
Yeah.
really really painful situations where guys have told me like frankly it's just this, it's the Mormon part.
The
It's
Mormon
not
thing.
everyone,
Yeah.
dating outside the church, not everyone is like that, but unfortunately in a couple of places, a couple of situations that have really meant a lot to me, that has been the sticking point. And I've just thought like I can't undo myself to be what this person wants. And it's not just that it constitutionally Mormonism is in me. I also still believe it. And that's kind of crazy because I think it's insane and the church drives me bonkers. Like all of these
Mhm.
things happen simultaneously in me. I just think that being raised in Mormonism, this was never language that was directly given to me, but it was what I picked up on as a child, as an adolescent, is that this was wanting to be so honest about reality and what it called us to do, that this was the way to go deepest into what it is to be alive. And
Hmm.
the spirit of Joseph Smith, by that I mean like, um, when you read the King Follett sermon and just this like lust for understanding what life actually is and what God is, I just like, I just feel like that brought me alive. And it's never really, that spark has never really gone out. And I feel like church life, as we've talked about so often, does not live up to its own challenges and the courage that we claim to have in life and in reality. But I still just feel so much of that spark in me when I really go deep and think about why I'm glad I'm alive, right? And that question again of like, am I good? Is my life good? I come back to these very basic things that I sort of imbibed growing up Mormon, which is
Mhm. Mhm.
life is good. It's in fact so good that heaven is just more of this life and it's going to be constant learning and progressing, and that we should have this expansive curiosity and boundless compassion. And every challenge you make, it's DNC 122. I remember in my own, teenage angst reading about how you could never go deep enough that Jesus wasn't going to go. You could never go deep enough into the dark that Jesus wasn't going to follow you there.
Yeah.
And then it ends with this line of, "And all this experience will be for thy good." It was just so fearless as a way to live. And it again, it just sparked something in me that is still there, that's still who I wanna be.
Mhm.
And I don't live up to that, but I can't deny that it gave me that initial spark of faith and brought me alive in a certain way that is kinda still kicking somewhere, even with all of the complicating factors.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Di Diana
I
and I were
think
oh, so sorry.
temperamentally, I'm like you, Diana, too, and
Mm,
so much what you said there resonates with me that there's I like thinking through Mormon lenses, this optimistic lens, this lens of, interconnectedness, the intrinsic value of life and everything and all that stuff. Even wrote my dissertation in that area, so I'm with you. And then I can relate. One of the essays I wrote years ago was called "Being a Mormon Without the But." Because so often when people learn you're Mormon, you want to say, "Oh, but I'm a liver
I'm
Mormon,
not like
but I
that.
don't hate gay people," or
Mhm.
you're always
Right.
constantly doing it, and then that transition of just being able to embody it and let the chips fall where they may. This is part of who I am, and I'm just not going to concentrate on the things that embarrass me as much as the things that you know gave me the lenses. So, like when I was in grad school, I would say every once in a while, in some discussion, I studied religion and at Claremont, Mallory, near you. Um,
Mm.
And it was like we're having a discussion. I go, Mormonism has an interesting take on this. And at first, everybody in the room's going, Mormonism has a take? Like, aren't you guys just these conservative, just a few steps away from Amish, and
Mm,
your weirdness and stuff like that. And then to finally just be able to say, here's an optimistic metaphysic or something that animates
mm.
things in this way. So I really appreciate that struggle with it drives me crazy, but I'm no longer trying to distance myself in how I present
Yeah.
or even think about myself as that, but this, so I don't know. I just related to
Yeah.
all that. So sorry. Thank you.
Although,
Yeah.
can I follow up with something about that? I mean, that I would love to read your essay,
Oh, long time
I'm
ago.
Mormon without the but, because
Me
I
too.
think about this but clause, whatever, I am constantly, like, fumbling over, and I don't wanna add it, I don't want it to be there, I don't think it should, and yet sometimes it feels like so much depends on it. And this is something that, you know, the social status of Mormonism has like real actual consequences in our lives. Mallory and I are both living in professional worlds where the people's initial reactions when they hear that word really affects whether you're going to get a job, whether they want to talk
Mhm.
to you again, whether there's a second date, where in the dating context, and it has actual effects. And I think that that is something about singleness that is really misunderstood. I have thought so many times to myself that it would be so much easier to bear this. I'm just Mormon without the but. If I had, if I had a little pod, like, right? Like, I've got my 2 best friends and I have fantasized that this would just be easier to bear with a husband, right? And, like, and I've got my family and I've got my small little team. But the truth is that, I need to figure out how to I mean, the challenge as a single person is I am giving myself to the world in other ways. I don't have this up close personal sphere, which means I do need to be out there trying to
Mhm.
build bridges in my community, trying to be a good influence and stuff like and leaning into other types of relationships. Dating outside the church is something that, you know, I didn't imagine myself doing like 10 years ago, but right now it feels like the most likely path if I want to have a family. And so I do need to be putting myself out there in the world. And the fact that um, we have such a low social ranking has actual effects. And so that butt clause sometimes feels like everything depends on it. And like I can have this secret understanding of how much Mormonism means to me, but it doesn't work. It doesn't translate. And even my very nuanced Catholic, Protestant, Jewish friends, sometimes you get someone who gets it and who is actually open to you. But honestly, even the best of them really kind of don't and actually still just kind of politely bury their biases. So, you know, I wish that were a little bit easier. And I don't have an answer. That's not a very positive thing to say, but that is
Yeah.
just honestly my experience and the way that singleness factors into that. That I just feel like I'm a little more vulnerable to all of these outside perceptions because I don't have
Yeah.
this
This,
pod
yeah.
close
Right.
to me that holds
Yeah.
me there.
This is where most of my life is lived,
Yeah.
in this little group. But yeah,
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. All I can say to that is amen, Diana. I feel so similarly.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you both have these deep
Mhm.
experiences. This is your language. This is your culture. These are the lenses that you like to look out from, the optimistic, parts of it. Um, a church that is churching. It's an
Mhm.
organization that's orging. It needs
Mhm.
to set boundaries and all these different things, and it wants to control at least the parameters of what's acceptable to talk about or to even think about. And any human journey is moving from giving your own authority to others to direct your life versus, you differentiate from your parents, you differentiate, and you have to ultimately differentiate from, the religious leaders of your day to where you have your own spiritual
Mhm.
anchors or this deep connection. Uh, Anything that surprised you along the way to finding that? Do you guys feel like you've been able to separate your Mormonism and your reasons for being in it from what the church leaders say, or like if they make some pronouncement that,
Mm.
sets back discussion within your ward? It looks like things
Yeah.
were going in this way and now everybody's going to be clamping down. Tell me any, I don't know if there's a question there. I just want to say,
Mhm.
how have you, uh, how have you differentiated enough to where you can let the stuff that drives you crazy not become the obsession of your life, and not be the thing that, all you want to talk about is all that crap.
Several years ago, when I was in one of my many spiritual crises or, uh, you know, woodshedding moments, whatever we want to call it, I was talking with a friend about how I had just had it again. And she said, "What if you just forget completely about the church and you just focus on God? What does that look like?" And that was some of the best advice anybody's ever given me, because that is the real thing that will guide our lives no matter what, is whatever people want to whatever name people want to assign to the unseen order and beauty in life, and to keep your eye on that and figure out how to keep moving, um, I think is always good advice. And for me, it sort of led to, I think, a healthy distance. Like you're describing a healthy distance with the leadership and with the church as a form, I guess. And I started becoming, I think, a little bit more of a spiritual collector in general. Like I'm I'm definitely I have so much holy envy for other religions, and I absolutely claim everything I possibly can from every modality I can, and that's been extremely helpful because I'm focused on God, and it's not just about the church, and it's been more helpful for me to see the church as a tool, as my heritage, and as a place to serve, but not something that needs to dictate my personality, dictate every step I take, but as something that I can use to get to closer to God, as a place to go to, like, for example, when all the fires started going up here in LA, how grateful was I to be a part of a church community that was going to organize and do something when it was like, where do we donate and what do we do and where do I drop all these clothes off and what do I do with all this hand sanitizer I bought and what do I do with, you know what I mean? It's like, so grateful to be a part of a church community. That's such a huge motivating factor, along with creating social structure and everything. So I think for me, um, creating enough distance to make space for your whole soul to be
Yeah.
bigger than what we've been able to create as a church, as a group of humans, for it to encompass more than just that has been very, very helpful for me.
Mhm. You know,
Yeah.
I'm just going to safely say, the fact that you want to do that, that you show up as yourself, that you feel like yourself, um, there's still a lot of work because you have to
Yes.
know how much of yourself to share at certain
Yes.
times. There's all that skill level of how do I show what I who I am without like making them to where they just say, "She's so weird,"
Oh,
or
man,
something
the
like that. So
number.
I think we could have a great discussion down the road of just that fitting
Yes.
in without doing damage to your soul.
You
There's this we'll
can't.
trade so much for acceptance that
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah. So anyway,
And genuinely, I mean, I know probably all 3 of us can relate to this, but I was a Sunday school teacher, I swear, for 10 years. Like, I just got called to it over and over again. And I just started being more and more honest and more vulnerable, and I felt like every time it created more connection. As
Mhm.
long as I was being honest, and most recently, like, during one of my one of my many faith nightmares. I mean, there's so many different terms for this. Like, I've done so much rebuilding in my life. I so relate to anybody who's been on any kind of religious path, because I think it requires so much reframing. It's such a good skill to have, and it's so difficult. But I got a calling, a stake calling, and I remember thinking at the time, like, I shouldn't get this calling because you don't know how much. You don't know everything I'm feeling and thinking right now. And the man who called me knew me very well. And he was like, we think that your specific perspective would be helpful to the girls. It was a young women's calling.
mhm,
And that to me gave me permission to be completely honest. And that's the permission I've tried to give myself ever since, which is just like, I can stay as long as I am being completely honest. And if I'm
Mhm.
not, then we're going to have a conversation. I don't at all consider myself a person who like has made a vow to never leave. Am making a vow to be honest with God.
yeah,
Mhm.
I
That's
love
my
it.
vow.
Mm.
Mm, that's wonderful. Diana, you started before I quickly followed up with Mallory. The ultimate question, the question was creating your own, um, distancing yourself
Mhm.
from every little thing that comes, out. How have you differentiated to where you can be yourself, think for
Yeah.
yourself, and act still within this larger community?
Yeah. Well, I just love everything Mallory said about the vow to be honest. It's really funny because, so for example, Dan, as I told you before this podcast, I've been a long time listener of your podcasts and hugely appreciative. And I feel like about a decade ago, I was really following a lot that's going on in the Mormon study scene, and the question always being, can you stay in the church? And what's so interesting is I think 10 years ago, I would have assumed that if you drop that question, then obviously you would just leave, right? Like you obviously have to be like running 60 miles per hour as fast as you can to remind people that they should stay in the church or else they're going to leave. It's just been interesting to watch how that world has tumbled through different cycles, and there's always turnover in the voices and the people there. My own life has gone through so many different phases, and I've stopped focusing on that question, and I think I just started listening more and realizing that that's all I can do is actually just show up with more, yeah, honesty and curiosity about my own
Curiosity.
life
Mhm.
and where things are going. And I don't know how to explain. It's not like that question is irrelevant. It's just like not even the central focus anymore. And I guess what's just interesting is like, yeah, I still find the church a productive place to be
Mm.
and a wonderful place to learn and grow. I think it's been really healthy for me to let go of uh just again catastrophizing when friends or other people leave the church and just being curious, just listening. About a year ago, I was going through a little breakup with somebody and uh walking into a Catholic chapel and just sitting there, and I love the anonymity of being in another church's church and just
Mhm.
being like, God, what am I supposed to do and what is the answer, and church stuff, marriage stuff. Should I keep dating? Should I, what should I do? And I just, when I'm really digging deep, I just get the sense that all I'm supposed to be doing is listening and thinking about what is expedient for today, right? Like, what is expedient for today? I resonate so much with what Mallory said about, often when the world's in crisis, when they're how lucky we are to belong to a church that actually knows how to meet needs and to belong to an organization. There's so many ways in which, yeah, just how the question of how the church helps us meet the needs of today is one that probably keeps me grounded there because it often is pretty helpful, to be honest. And um yeah, and I want to stay grounded in that question, I suppose, and just keep listening to what life needs from me every day. Yeah.
Man, those are wonderful perspectives, you guys. I could talk with you forever. I have probably learned more in this show than 80% of the shows I've done in sense of, you know, the lives that you are living, whether they were exactly, again, they didn't go according to the plan exactly. Um, you've come with so many fresh, wonderful insights that I'm going to listen to. Actually, besides the editing it, might listen to this quite a few times because there's just this richness around all these different edges that I really appreciate you guys. Um, Thanks for sharing who you are, and
Thanks.
thanks for the show that you're doing.
Yeah,
But
well, thank
who
you
wants
so much,
who wants to
Dan,
start?
and I'm so grateful for all the work that you've been doing. Like I said, you've
Yeah.
had a huge impact on me, and your warmth and presence and the way and your courage in wading through these questions with people has just meant a lot to me over the years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ditto. Hallelujah, Dan. Really, you're such a beautiful person, and your work has been so incredible. We've needed you so badly. So thank you.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, we need you. So we're all in this together, man. Fellow travelers
Yeah,
in this
baby.
universe and in this church. Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for listening, everyone. If you would like to continue the conversation with us, we invite you to subscribe to our Substack. You can find us at thesoloist.substack.com. That will allow you to get an email in your inbox every time we release a new episode, and you can click just directly on the links to the readings and the things that we're watching, reading, and thinking about. It also allows for easy two-way conversation with us. Hearing from you all is honestly the best part. No matter how cliche it is, I know every podcast says that, but it's really true. So please subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.